Welcome back to this course MSD012 Ecosystem and Natural Resources. Dear learners, now in the second session of agrobiodiversity, after having an understanding about the concept of agrobiodiversity, its center of origins and its center of origin, now let us try to have an understanding about the importance of agrobiodiversity as a student of sustainability science. So today in this session, we are going to look into role of agrobiodiversity in ecosystem services, in food security, and importance of those associated agrobiodiversity like wild varieties and other species, and how agrobiodiversity gives livelihoods to the farmers, and how agrobiodiversity also has to adapt and cope of that climate change. And then how agrobiodiversity play an important role in sustainable agriculture in the future, right? So when we look into the role of agrobiodiversity, we know that over millennia since the human civilization started, human well-being has been founded on the services that biodiversity provides. The most abuse of which is the production of foods, soils, and fibers in the agricultural landscape. Such kind of services that have been and going to be the basis for economic development for a large proportion of human population across the world. So if you look into wider context, we also know that biodiversity is the agricultural landscape that serves critical function that enhance the environmental base upon which agriculture depends. So this function include regulating and supporting services such as water purification, nutrient cycling, soil formation. So based on different studies done by different researchers, academy, we can look into how this agrobiodiversity play an important role on all these services. For example, because of agrobiodiversity, higher diversity of agrobiodiversity in that area, that increase the productivity of that area, that give the food security and economic returns to the society, and that also reduce the pressure of agriculture on fragile areas, forest and endangered species, and because of the high agrobiodiversity that makes farming system more stable, robust, and sustainable. Agrobiodiversity contribute to sound pace and disease management. It conserves soil and increase natural soil fertility and health, because in a certain type of that associated species of agrobiodiversity or agricultural activities, they have the nitrogen fixing capacity, sometimes then protect from soil degradation or soil improve the soil fertility. So that also contribute to sustainable intensification of agriculture. If you look into the diversity of agricultural activities or agrobiodiversity, it diversifies products and income opportunities to the people. In the same time, it reduces or spread risks to individuals and nations, and it also has been maximizing the effective use of resources and the environment. So if you have a sustainable farming system which is of high agrobiodiversity, it reduces the dependency on external inputs. That's we have shown in this particular COVID-19 situation. And this agrobiodiversity improves the nutrition of human and provide source of medicine, vitamin, and when we manage our agrobiodiversity is also conserve the ecosystem structure and stability of species diversity. Then coming to how agrobiodiversity play important role in ecosystem services. If you look into the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, that aim to promote the understanding of the value of biodiversity to human society, and conversely costs associated with actual and projected biodiversity losses, that Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, then they have found that this Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, they widely use the term ecosystem services, right? So based on that, they define that ecosystem services is goods and services provided by the biodiversity, and it can be looked into a bit numerous in number, and there are several ways that we can look what are the services given by this ecosystem. But that can be looked into four basic categories. One is the first one, goods or provisioning services. Second, cultural services. Third, regulating services. Fourth, supporting services. Details we have already studied in the beginning of a few of the session in this MSD012, the ecosystem and natural resources, in the same that course. Right. So in that line, when we talk about those concept of ecosystem that services, especially in the context of agrobiodiversity, these ecosystem services have further been redistributed into three major categories, which signify different aspects of food production system. First category includes sustainable production of food and other agricultural products that emphasize both strengthening sustainability in production system at all levels of intensity and improving the conservation, sustainable use and enhancement of the diversity of all genetic resources for food and agriculture, especially look into the plant and animal genetic resources in all type of production system. The second category includes biological or life support to production, emphasizing conservation, sustainable use and enhancements of the biological resources that support sustainable production system, particularly soil biota, pollinators and predators. Right. The third category includes ecological and social services provided by agroecosystems such as landscape and wildlife protection, soil protection and health, like structure of soil, fertility of soil, and the function of that soil, water cycle, water quality, air quality, carbon dioxide sequestration, etc. and so on. Again, what people we are managing this agrobiodiversity, or we are practicing agriculture is for our food. Definitely there is a close link between this agrobiodiversity and food security. We know that in one of the old report that's published by FAO, they estimated, FAO means Food and Agricultural Organization, in 2005 estimated that at least 852 million people worldwide suffer from hunger and malnutrition. 80% of them live in rural areas. So tackling this hunger has for many years been one of the issues at the heart of international cooperation. This is one of the reasons in our MDGs also. It is one of the eradicating extreme poverty and hunger by achieving food security was one of the 8 Millennium Development Goals. The same way we have different food security related SDGs, like to end hunger, to end poverty, human well-being, etc. Right. Again, when we exactly look into the definition of what food security means, as per the World Food Summit of 1996 that was happening in Rome, food security is, we can say that food security is achieved when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preference for an active and healthy life. There are three co-determinants of food security. First, availability. Second, if you have availability, you need to give access. Then if you give access, then utilization is important. So when you talk about availability, it involves the production of a sufficient quantity of food that is available in the right time, in the right place. Points to, and that needs to be noted. Right. Then when you talk about access, giving access means that comes on the demand side. In particular, the problem of people who cannot buy enough food, even if it is available. That's why access. Then utilization, that involves the correct storage, processing, combination of foods. Then only we will be able to achieve food security. Right. We know that at least from the last 40, at least more than 40,000 species of plants and animals we use, it is used by human. And around the world, people depend on all these species for food, shelter, clothing, and energy requirement. And we obtain the food from various food crops and animal species. So genetic resources are particularly relevant for food sector. There are several thousands relevant species of edible plants, as we know, but only 20 kinds of plants are cultivated to produce about 80% of world's food. The three major crops we know are wheat, rice, and maize that contribute about 2/3 of total food production. There are enormous untapped potential for increasing the range of food production which are suitable for human consumption. So we need to explore more in a systematic way. At the same time, we know that higher yield of major food crops that was achieved through the Green Revolution have contributed to food security in many countries. But even where high-tech agriculture predominates, greater species diversity could, in the long run, that will help to develop new products that stabilize yield and optimize the utilization of resources such as fertilizer or water for irrigation. Means we have to promote, we must try to avoid monoculture, right? Some of the regions like deserts and mountain areas, they have some disadvantages by their natural situation, and because of them, the yield offered that year, that areas is little. I mean, improvement is only little. That needs to be improved because of that environmental condition. So it is in this very particular area that local plant species and animal beds are often advantageous since they are optimally adapted to the local condition, right? So together, with the traditional knowledge and the practices, they help the farmers make the best use of those limited resources. When we talk about the food security, filling one's belly is often not enough. People who live on the brink of poverty often lack a variety of diet. Okay. So the appropriate use and combination of food only can contribute to long-term health, particularly among children. That is exactly what food security talk about, means nutritious security, right? Leafy vegetable, fruits, legumes, roots, tubers, spices, and many more herbs are essential, as you know, for human nutrition, and they complement staple crops such as rice or maize. Many leguminous crops such as cowpea, wing bean, they are excellent source of protein and micronutrients. Again, if you look into micro labels, home gardens often accommodate a particularly rich diversity of crops. Home gardens that is particularly managed and run by women, most of the production from that place is directly used for cooking, benefiting all the family. So establishment and appropriate support of those home garden is very, therefore, a promising option for improving nutritional status of poor people both in rural and peri-urban area. Means that is one of the keys to food security. They also serve this particular home garden also serve to raise as a source of nutritious food, and at the same time those who run or who manage that home gardens, women, also serve to raise awareness of the importance of diversity of traditional food plants. Then importance in addition to what we are well managed in agricultural agro-ecosystem, there are certain a very wide variety of wild varieties of species which are very important. The reservoir of genetic traits that present in wild varieties and traditionally grown land races, they are very important in improving the crop performance. That's why we are talking about agrobiodiversity, right? So important crops such as potato, that banana, and coffee, they are often derived from only a few genetic strains. So improvement in crop species over the last few 2 centuries have been largely due to the harnessing those genes from those wild varieties and species. Right. At the same time, interbreeding crops strains with different beneficial traits, they also resulted in more than doubling crop production in the last 50 years. We have seen that evidence in Green Revolution. We also know that wild plants, they serve as supplement to human food in many parts of the world. These wild plants greatly helps to reduce human pressure on agriculture, particularly in a region where agricultural production is have greater challenge because of many constraints like population, land degradation, then access, because of their geographical or landform condition. For example, if you look into the African Sahel region, rural women carefully collect the fruit, leaves and roots of native plants for use in the family's diet. So these wild plants supplement the agricultural grains, millet, sorghum that provide only one part of nutritional aspect that benefit, and these are some of the important role in maintaining the nutrition in that society, in that particular community. More than 800 species of edible wild plants have been cataloged across the world. In addition to supplying calories and protein, wild foods supply vitamins and other essential micronutrients. But in some areas, pressure on land is so great that wild food supplies have been exhausted. When we talk about wild food, it describes all plant resources that are harvested or collected from for human consumption outside agricultural areas in forests and from grassland and other bushland areas. For instance, for example, some of the fruits, berries, and a wide range of wild growing plants, they are termed as wild food, right? Then coming to agrobiodiversity, how it plays an important role in a livelihood of a farmer. Many farmers, especially those living in an environment where high yield crops and livestock varieties do not process, they rely on a wider range of crop and livestock types. For example, in the mountainous region, most of the mountainous region, like in India, the Himalayan mountain range, and the northeastern, that Himalayan region, etc. So this agrobiodiversity helps them maintain their livelihood in the face of that pathogen infestation in their agricultural crop, uncertain rainfall, and fluctuation in the price of cash crops, socio-political disruption, and unpredictable availability of agrochemical. So this is sometimes called as a minor or underutilized crops or companion crops, and they are frequently found next to the main crop or cash crop. Means they follow mixed cropping system. This particular community in that region, they often grow these minor crops along with a major crop. For example, in Himalayan ecosystem that we have in Bara system, right? So their importance is, however, often misjudged. In many other cases, from a livelihood perspective, they are not minor or underutilized. They can play this disproportionately important role in food production system at local level. Those plants that will grow in infertile or eroded soil and livestock that will eat degraded vegetation they are very crucial to household nutritional strategies also, right? So in addition, rural communities and urban market within which they trade make great use of this companion of crop species, right? For example, in some of the fallow fields and wildlands, these also can support large number of species which are useful to farmers. If you look in general, poor households, they rely on access to wild foods more than that wealthier people. So wild foods are incorporated into normal livelihood strategy for many rural peoples, like pastoralists, shifting cultivator, continuous crop for hunter-gatherer. So this wild food is usually considered as a dietary supplement to farmers' daily food consumption, generally based on their crop harvest, domestic livestock product, and food purchase on local market. One of the causes of food insecurity is chronic or temporary shortage of money, as we know that. Even if food is available in sufficient quantity and quality, not everyone has the resources to buy it. That's why we're talking about affordability, right? So improving the income situation of such people is an essential part of improving food security. So especially often little non-plant varieties and livestock breeds offer potential for income generation of such kind of people. Like this may involve, when we talk about those processes that involve food, medicine, cosmetic, and craft products, or developing new markets and market niches for such products. So the organic and the fair trade markets, they will also provide potential for long-term initiative in these areas. That's why nowadays we are talking about local food, traditional food, right? Then coming to one of the important relation with agrobiodiversity, climate change. We know that the implication of climate change for agriculture have often a new window in the discussion of agrobiodiversity. Environment change is happening, and it is one of many factors that are responsible for reducing the diversity of crops and livestock. If you look into the impact of climate change, there are some of the major impact that can be looked in 5 major impacts. The rise in temperature, change in precipitation pattern, then rise of sea level, higher incidence of extreme weather events, and the increase of greenhouse gases, when we talk especially that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So when we talk about the rise in temperature, that we call as global warming, it is one of the important that is because of important that has direct impact to the food production system, that means to the agricultural sector, right? It is expected, if you look into the pattern of that rise in temperature, this will increase. That increase will be highest in the tropic and subtropics, and there will be large scale extinction of species, lower agricultural yields, and a major change in cropping system in tropic and subtropic areas. Indirect temperature effect, if you look into from that point of view, that will include, when there is, because of that temperature increase, there will be increase in evaporation of water from the soil. So that accelerated decomposition of organic matter and increased incidence of that pests and diseases that will affect both in animals and plants. The dramatic implications are also expected for agriculture and food supply that may be varied from one region to another region. So it is predicted that the 40 poorest countries located predominantly in tropical Africa and Latin America, they may lose 10 to 20% of their grain growing capacity due to drought by 2080. It means when there is drought, it may not be, it will be very difficult to grow vegetable and so on, to practice agriculture. And some of the academics or researchers argued that many rain-fed crops in some areas are already near their maximum temperature tolerance, and that their yield may fall sharply with the further temperatures rise. So by contrast, yield increases are expected in the temperate region. A country like China could experience a 25% rise in production. Most tragically, all these changes are likely to hit the world poorest people in the hardest way. So combating such changes requires a two-pronged strategy of mitigation and adaptation. On the one hand, all possible efforts must be made to reduce greenhouse gas emission and to slow climate change. On the other, first and appropriate action is needed to enhance capacity to adapt to this irreversible change that already inherent in the system. From that point, agrobiodiversity provide potential option to combat against the challenge posed by climate change. So, agricultural genetic diversity are not only a victim of climate change, they are of fundamental importance also for adaptation to this change and are crucial to coping with problems it poses. There are a number of plants and animals which presently, have no economic value, but this can cope with changing climate situation. However, climate change requires not only that genetic resources to conserve those resources, but also that they should adapt to climate change. Plants, animals, and ecosystem, they have the capacity to adjust to changes in the factors such as heat, drought, or salinity, and this enables us to cope with the consequences of changing environment. This capacity is an outcome of that genetic diversity. Then again, adaptation. When we talk about adaptation, is a dynamic process that brought about through an organism interaction with its environment. So it is not a matter, for example, about deep freezing a drought-resistant strain of millet for many decades in a gene bank, but rather it should be continuing to grow and breed the seeds in the fields where they are exposed to a wide range of agricultural and ecological conditions. So the resistance of plants to environmental stress like drought tolerance, flood tolerance is a multi-genetic characteristic. So it is difficult to achieve through genetic engineering, and the base developed through classical, will be possible if we develop through classical breeding, then it will not be possible if we use genetic engineering through in situ condition of that classical breeding. So if we look from the social dimension of this adaptive process, it is also important. The poor sectors of the population, particularly, they must be enabled to adapt to changing environmental conditions. Traditional knowledge and social organization must be strengthened and developed. So climate change induced, environmental stress that may in fact exceed the adaptive capacities of animals and plants to cope with it. So the in situ approach offers a genuine chance to shape a future worth living, right? So then again, when we talk about agrobiodiversity for sustainable agriculture, we know that for more than 10,000 years, farmers have been selecting plants to develop varieties that produce higher yield, are less susceptible to disease, and they show a certain degree of uniformity in germination, ripening, which make harvesting easier. Through this selection of the crop plants and by cultivating them under various, in some cases, harsh environmental conditions over the millennia, because of that, rich biodiversity of agricultural crop species has been developed. In India, for example, we have more than 30,000 rice cultivars. Right, during the past 150 years, this trend has become reversed. So the biological diversity of crop plants has been dwindling. Not only are fewer and fewer plant species used for agriculture, but genetic diversity within species also declining. Plant breeding and commercial seed production have contributed substantially to the reduction of genetic diversity within individual species. And so, the number of varieties of any given crop is constantly decreasing, and the varieties are becoming increasingly uniform, while certain characteristics are being lost during the process. So, in view of the necessity of adapting to climate change and ensuring that global food security, this genetic erosion that threatens the existence of global population. So, in order to meet these and the future challenges, which we do not know what will happen in the near future, humanity needs whatever genetic diversity still exists. So, at the same time, conservation of biological diversity must be reconciled with agricultural intensification. In the last 50 years, say from 1950 to 2000, in the 50 years, global grain production almost tripled. This increase was mainly made possible through the progression in plant breeding, and that also increased the productivity. However, this was achieved due to the fertile soil under optimal growing condition and these have only small percentages, only some few small percentages of the farmers benefited from these activities. So a large proportion of all farmers still smallholding. This mostly involve no external inputs such as fertilizers and pesticides, because the classic intensification strategies are not suitable for such farm. So if you look into 1980s, around 60% of all agricultural land was still being farmed in this manner. Even though this figure is probably smaller today, traditional agriculture still contributes substantially to world food production and is fundamental to food security. So in order to feed the increasing world population, agriculture intensification is required. The world population is expected to grow more than 9 billion by 2050. The potential to expand agricultural land to feed this population, however, is very limited. In order for intensification to be sustainable, and then agriculture must start using nutrient and energy more efficiently. It must sustain ecosystem and their function while conserving biodiversity, and it has to be climate friendly. One possibility for increasing yield potential of traditionally farmed land is increasing on-farm species diversity, but crops and their varieties that are expected to produce higher yield on poorer sites must have trail different to the high-yielding varieties used on agriculturally favorable site. So the search for alternatives should be started for 50 years that needs to have a evolutionary plant breeding method. So in order to generate new varieties, breeders systematically in that process utilize farmers' local varieties that are genetically diverse and had adapted ecologically. So in that process involves bringing together seed from different origins and recombining them through crossbreeding. So evolutionary breeding with composite crossbred population is a very promising method for agricultural intensification, particularly under ecological advantageous conditions and for adapting crops to climate change induced environmental change. So participatory plant breeding is one good approach to ensure agrobiodiversity conservation as well as agricultural sustainability. In contrast to classical approach, breeding is not done by breeders alone, nor does it take place only in experimental fields or in laboratories. So farmers are involved throughout the entire breeding process, and most of the breeding takes place in their field. So this will help to ensure better ecological adaptability of the crops towards condition of farmers' field. So if you look in here, see what are if you summarize the thing what we have done today during the last session also, what are the component of agricultural ecosystem, what are the functional agro-ecosystem biodiversity, how we are enhancing that, you will be able to understand from here. When you talk about the components, it talks about a pollinator, it contains pollinator, predators, and herbivores, non-crop, crop, earthworm, soil. And when you talk about the function, pollination, genetic, and then genetic diversity, population regulation, biological controls, and so on, you will see here, right? So if you summarize that, the threat to agrobiodiversity is, climate change, right? In the same time, we know that agrobiodiversity provides means of livelihood to smallholder farmers across the world, particularly to those who are living harsh environment and less in industrialized countries. So in this session, we have discussed about the importance of agrobiodiversity in terms of ecosystem function, in terms of farmers' livelihood, and how to adapt that climate change, cope up with climate change through this agrobiodiversity. Thank you very much.